Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the Atlantic revolutions. And when we talk about the Atlantic revolutions, we consider them to be pretty much any revolution that occurs roughly between the 1770s and the 1820s or 30s that happened in any place that is around the geographic area of the Atlantic Ocean, the Atlantic Basin. So generally, we consider, particularly starting in the 1770s, things like the American Revolution, starting in April of 1775, and then going on to 1783. We obviously include things like the French Revolution and things like the Latin American revolutions that begin with the Haitian Revolution in the 1790s, and then with the Simon Bolivar and other revolutions that occur later in the 1800s. So when we start thinking about that, we have to start thinking about them as also not just what that they happen in the same time period, but they also in large part deal with the same entities or the same ideas, right? So for instance, one of the things that is important to remember is that many of them have the same similar social structures, where you have the mass of people at the bottom, whether that means it's the lowest classes, the plebes, the impoverished folk, and then other groups at the top. So this cartoon here is a cartoon referring to the French Revolution, and it is talking about the French society, right? So in the French society in the 1700s, or before 1789 really, there are three estates, right? There is an estate system where you have a group of people at the bottom, the third estate, and that's basically 98% of the population by historical reckoning. And then you have the two groups above it, right? The second estate, which is the aristocratic or noble estate, and then the group above that is the first estate, which is the church, the Roman Catholic clergy. So generally, when we think about this, we break it down into this three-tiered system. Now, the first estate, as I mentioned, is the Roman Catholic Church. This is the priests, the bishops, the archbishops, the cardinals that are in France, and they are the people who sort of receive the greatest benefit from the society. In this, you have the clergy receiving a tithe, tithes. The tithe is a tax that everybody must pay. It's 10% of their income, and it goes directly to the church. Additionally, you have the church owning about a third of all the land in France, which means they are wealthy, and they are also not only getting this tax, but they're also receiving rent from the poor people. Below that, you have the the second estate, excuse me. This is about 2% of the population, and again, they also own a ton of land. Again, roughly about 20% of the land, and they receive rents from them, from the poor people. Then below that, you have a group of about 97 to 98% of the population. 80% of the whole population is roughly farmers. So again, they're the poor people renting from the richer people. But then you also have, this group of bourgeoisie. These are wealthy merchants. They are the people who own a shop. Maybe they're your candlestick makers, your bakers, and things like that. Your lawyers, doctors, physicians, sailors. These are people who might have some money and some knowledge. So I'm not going to go through the dates of the French Revolution necessarily, because there are other videos and readings that you will do to help you with those. But I do want to talk about the important features of it. So sorry. So you have some ideas that become significant here, particularly in June of 1789, there is the Tennis Court Oath, on which the people of France decide that they will not stop meeting until a new constitution is established, that the king's power, King Louis XVI's power, is suppressed or at least guarded. And in that, the king is definitely going to receive a limiting of his power. The church is going to receive a limiting of their power. And the real major thing that happens in there is the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. In August of 1789, the National Assembly comes together and they pass the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. This is a document that codifies the rules that people are going to get. And one of the first things that it says, Article 1 of it, or Statement 1 of it, says that all men are created equal and social distinction should only be based on common good. Again, why do we have this three-estate system? So ultimately, when the French Revolution is going on, things are done to try and reduce the power of the church and reduce the power of the people who used to have power, right? So traditions are gotten rid of. One of the things that happens is they change the calendar because they don't want it to be based on religious ideals any longer. So they start it with when the revolution really kicks off, the sort of radical phase of the revolution. If you did your reading, you will know that there is a radical phase that occurs starting in 1792 with the Reign of Terror. Then you have, again, reducing the sort of old traditions. They change the name of the month. There's a document passed called the Civil Constitution of the Clergy, which makes the clergy now directly responsible and responsive to the people of France. So there are ways that the church is losing its power, and it's really a sort of disruption of the social system. Remember when you see the video on the Reign of Terror, right? The Reign of Terror is a period by which anybody who is seen as an enemy of the revolution is killed or their property is burned. The church is targeted particularly, right? So during this period where there's the Reign of Terror, which I do not have a slide on here, during the Reign of Terror, there is a demand for people who are enemies of the revolution to be killed. Clergy members are killed. The churches are destroyed. The Notre Dame Cathedral, located in the center of Paris, is renamed the Temple of Wisdom. Right? I mean, they go in and they take away the old relics of the church. So the church is significantly limited and diminished in its time period. Similarly, you have another place that is also experiencing this. So there's another place that's experienced all of these problems as well, and it's across the Atlantic Ocean in Haiti. Now, the Haitian Revolution begins in 1791, and it's a direct outgrowth of the French Revolution. Because, obviously, Saint-Domingue, which was Haiti's name before it became Haiti, was a French colony early in the period, you have this new sense of sort of liberal ideas that emerge in Haiti, Saint-Domingue, with this revolution, right? How can the French be calling for equal rights and the people in Haiti don't have them? So Haiti was, or Saint-Domingue, I should say, was a really very wealthy colony for the French government, growing sugar and coffee. And because of that, Saint-Domingue had a massive slave population, roughly 500,000 slaves. Now, just like the estate system in France, Haiti, Saint-Domingue, had a massive, had a social structure, right? At the top was a group of people called the Grands Blancs, the big whites. Underneath them, you had a group called the Petits Blancs, poor whites. And then below that, you had a group of free people of color, either mixed race or black people who had received their independence through either manumission or buying their own freedom. The Grands Blancs, the big whites, were the wealthiest, right? Obviously, they were the people who owned the plantations and made the most money off of selling the sugar. Petits Blancs would be people who worked for them, overseers, merchants, and things like that. And then the free people of color would be people who, again, might be overseers, might be artisans, might be merchants, but they would obviously be poorer than the Petits Blancs. The rebellion begins in 1791 with Toussaint Louverture, who is a slave who is freed and begins targeting the Grands Blancs and the Petits Blancs. By 1793, his army was strong enough to begin to fight the whites, and he begins to push back this small white contingent. Ultimately, by 1797, he has control over all of the island. He renamed the island is renamed from Saint-Domingue to Haiti in representation of the indigenous population that lived there, the Aiti people. And there's a new constitution established. However, because the French Revolution is going on simultaneously, the French government can't let this Haitian Revolution continue. So the French respond, and when they respond, we now have Napoleon in power. So he responds in 1802, and this is a devastating failure for Napoleon. When he responds, this is a way in which disease really impacts the whole situation, because the French are not suited to deal with malaria, yellow fever, and other diseases that are ravaging the population. The people are dying. The soldiers are dying in massive numbers, although the fighting is pretty sparse. Toussaint Louverture is ultimately captured, and he dies on the transport back to France. But ultimately, the French have to withdraw. Now, when they do withdraw, Haiti's large black population really comes to dominate the island, and the people of Haiti, really push out the white population, and it is the only successful slave revolution that ever occurs, and it becomes the second democracy of the Western Hemisphere behind the United States. So it is a massively important event. However, I think it's often overlooked because Haiti ultimately, because of ultimate terrible political corruption and racism by groups of people, America included, Haiti never really gets a fair shake, and it becomes, as it is today, the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, and it becomes a terrible situation where people are impoverished. However, it did start out as this attempt to get rid of a social structure that had dominated it and caused it to be so impoverished. So you see that the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution have major impacts throughout the late 1700s.